The grand halls of the Zarinthian palace shimmered with golden light, reflecting off towering crystalline pillars that stretched toward the sky. The air carried a faint scent of exotic flowers, a fragrance meant to soothe the mind. Yet, despite the beauty surrounding him, Ambassador Daniel Cross felt the weight of 1,000 alien eyes watching his every move. He walked with steady steps, his tailored suit crisp, his shoulders squared. Humans were new to the galactic scene, but he had not come here to cower. He was here to negotiate, not as a servant, but as an equal. Whispers rippled through the palace corridors as he passed. The Zarinthians, an ancient and powerful species, had never invited a human to their homeworld before. They considered themselves the rulers of diplomacy, the masters of language and tradition. To them, humans were a young and reckless species, barely worthy of notice. Yet here he was, the first human diplomat ever to stand in the heart of their empire. The heavy doors of the royal chamber slid open with a soft hum. Inside, nobles in elaborate robes stood in rows, their shimmering garments reflecting the shifting colors of their emotions. Some displayed cool blues of curiosity, while others flickered with reds of annoyance. At the center of it all, on an elevated throne of translucent stone, sat Princess Velora. She was regal and poised, her violet eyes sharp with intelligence. Her golden crown, shaped like entwined wings, shimmered under the soft glow of the chamber lights. Unlike the others, her colors remained unreadable, hidden behind careful control. Daniel stepped forward, stopping at the designated spot. He knew the customs. Here, he was expected to bow deeply, lowering himself to show respect. But he didn't. Instead, he inclined his head just slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement but not submission. It was a small act, yet in this room of tradition-bound aliens, it was a thunderclap of defiance. Gasps filled the chamber. A murmur of disbelief spread among the nobles. A human had dared to stand tall before the royal heir. Princess Velora's eyes narrowed slightly, but instead of anger, there was something else. Curiosity. "You are bold, Ambassador Cross," she said, her voice smooth but edged with something unreadable. "Most who stand before the throne of Zarinth bow without hesitation." Daniel held her gaze. Respect is not measured by how low one bends, but by how honestly one speaks. Another ripple of shock moved through the court. The Zarinthians were masters of careful, poetic speech, where meaning was often buried under layers of formality. But humans spoke directly, and that made them unpredictable. Velora studied him for a moment, then gestured for him to step forward. "Very well, Ambassador. Speak honestly. Tell us why humanity believes it deserves a place at this table." Daniel smiled, but it wasn't the soft, careful smile of a man seeking approval. It was a smile of confidence, of a man who had prepared for this very moment. "Deserve," he echoed. "Perhaps we do not deserve anything, but we have earned the right to be here. Humanity has fought against extinction, survived against impossible odds, and built a future among the stars, not because it was given to us, but because we reached out and took it." His voice carried across the hall, unwavering. He was not pleading. He was not asking. He was stating a fact. "We did not come here to beg," he continued. "We came here to offer a future where Zarinth and humanity stand as allies, a future where our strengths combine rather than clash. But we will not bow to be part of it. We will stand beside you, or not at all." The silence that followed was deafening. The nobles were frozen, their colors shifting wildly between outrage and uncertainty. No one had ever spoken to them this way. They were used to fear, to careful flattery. But this was something else. Princess Velora leaned forward slightly. For the first time in centuries, someone had surprised her. Daniel Cross was not afraid. He was here to change the game. And she was beginning to wonder if he just might succeed. The silence in the grand chamber stretched long after Daniel Cross finished speaking. The nobles of Zarinth shifted uneasily, their shimmering robes reflecting colors of uncertainty, disbelief, and for some, outrage. No diplomat had ever spoken so directly before. The Zarinthians valued poetry and speech, careful words that wrapped meaning in layers of tradition. But this human, he spoke in straight lines, cutting through formality like a blade. Princess Velora remained still on her throne, her violet eyes fixed on the man before her. He did not bow. He did not beg. Instead, he stood tall, his expression calm but unwavering. Finally, she spoke. Humanity claims to have earned its place at this table. Yet, words alone do not make one strong. Her voice was smooth, but there was a sharpness beneath it, like steel wrapped in silk. Tell me, Ambassador, what makes humans different from the countless species who sought our favor before? Daniel did not hesitate, because we never sought favor. We made our own path. We survived our wars, our disasters, our weaknesses, not because we were guided, but because we refused to fall. A murmur ran through the court. The Zarinthians had seen the history of mankind. They knew of Earth's struggles, its wars, its near extinctions. Yet, despite everything, humans had climbed higher, refusing to be crushed by fate. Velora studied him, her fingers resting lightly on the arm of her throne. Survival is not the same as strength, she said. Even the smallest creatures fight to live. That does not make them mighty. Daniel allowed himself a small smile. Then perhaps strength is not just survival, but the will to defy expectation. I was expected to bow today. He tilted his head slightly, amusement flickering in his eyes. I did not. The court stiffened at the reminder of his earlier defiance. Princess Velora did something unexpected. She smiled. It was not a warm or amused smile, but one of interest, a rare sight in the royal court. You play a dangerous game, Ambassador, she said, her voice quieter now. A lesser diplomat might have already lost his head for such boldness. Daniel met her gaze without fear. Then it's fortunate that I am not a lesser diplomat. A ripple of shock spread through the nobles. This human was not just bold, he was fearless. Velora leaned back in her throne, considering. Very well, Ambassador, you have my attention. Let us see if you can keep it. She gestured toward the side of the room. A long table was brought forward, its surface made of shimmering, living crystal. The table adjusted its shape as it was placed before them, shifting like flowing water before settling into form. This is the game of realms, Velora said. It is a test of strategy and diplomacy, played by rulers and ambassadors across the stars. If you wish to negotiate with the Zarinthian Empire, you will play. Daniel studied the board. It resembled chess, but the pieces shifted on their own, reacting to his movements before he even touched them. Clearly, it was a game that required more than just logic. It demanded anticipation, adaptation, and control. A Zarinthian noble stepped forward. He was tall, his deep blue robes marking him as a high-ranking official. His golden eyes glowed with quiet arrogance. I will be your opponent, human, he said smoothly. Let us see if you are as skilled with the mind as you are with words. Daniel sat across from him, his expression unreadable. The game began. The noble moved first, his piece gliding across the board with effortless precision. The game's shifting rules made it impossible to rely on patterns. Every move Daniel made, the board adapted. This was not just a game. It was a test of how well he could predict the unpredictable. The court watched closely. Some expected Daniel to lose within minutes. But as the game continued, something became clear. He was learning. Every mistake, every shift in the board's rules he adapted. The noble's confidence began to crack as Daniel countered moves he had no way of knowing in advance. He wasn't just reacting. He was reading the game itself, understanding the flow, adjusting with each change. Minutes stretched into an hour. The court grew silent. The noble was struggling. And then, with one final decisive move, Daniel won. A deep silence fell over the chamber. The defeated noble looked down at the board in stunned disbelief. Never before had an outsider, a human, mastered the game of realms so quickly. Daniel leaned back slightly, his face calm. I believe that concludes our match." Princess Velora studied the board for a long moment. Then, slowly, she looked back at him. For the first time in centuries, a human had won a game meant to test the greatest minds of the Empire. Velora's expression remained neutral, but in her eyes, there was something new. Respect. "You continue to surprise me, Ambassador Cross," she said softly. Daniel simply smiled. "I intend to." A quiet tension filled the royal chamber. The glow of the Game of Realms board had faded, but the weight of what had just happened still lingered in the air. Daniel Cross had won. A human had defeated a Zarinthian noble in a game designed to test strategy, patience, and intelligence. The court had not expected this. Princess Velora had not expected this. She leaned forward slightly, her violet eyes unreadable. "You learn quickly, Ambassador." Daniel gave a small nod. Adaptation is a human strength. A noble standing nearby, Lord Syrinx, was less amused. His golden eyes flickered with irritation, his robes darkening to a shade of deep red. A Zarinthian sign of anger. "Games prove nothing," he said sharply. "A single victory does not make your kind worthy of alliance." Daniel turned his head toward him. "Then what does?" Syrinx stepped forward, towering over Daniel. He was older, more experienced in politics, and carried the air of someone who believed he was above all others. "Strength," he said coldly. "Zarinth does not ally with the weak." Daniel met his gaze without flinching. "Then why invite me here?" Syrinx's colors darkened further. The answer was clear, but unspoken. Some in the Empire wanted peace with humanity, but others wanted something else. Princess Velora raised a hand, silencing any further argument. "Enough," she said. "The ambassador has proven himself. For now." But Daniel was not done. He had been observing everything carefully. The flickering colors of the nobles, the way certain figures whispered among themselves, the small but deliberate glances exchanged across the room. And now his instincts told him something was wrong. Very wrong. He took a slow step forward, his gaze locked onto Velora's. "Your Highness, I came here to negotiate peace between our people, but I suspect that not everyone in this room wants peace." The room went still. Velora's expression did not change, but a flicker of something passed through her eyes. "Explain," she said. Daniel turned, his voice steady. The invitation to negotiate came suddenly, after years of silence. And yet, I've seen hesitation, hostility, even. This is not just about diplomacy. His eyes narrowed slightly. Someone here wants this negotiation to fail. A murmur ran through the court. Some nobles shifted uncomfortably, while others remained still, their colors dimming as they processed his words. Syrinx scoffed. "A bold claim, human. Do you have proof?" Daniel studied him for a moment before answering. "Not yet, but I know how to find it." Princess Velora observed him carefully. Humans were known for their unpredictability, their ability to think beyond what was expected. And now, this human had sensed a danger that even she had only begun to suspect. She rose from her throne, her presence commanding the room's attention. "If there are those who seek to sabotage these talks," she said slowly, "then we must uncover them." Daniel took a deep breath. This was a dangerous path, but he had no choice. The future of humanity depended on these negotiations. And now, he knew, someone wanted to start a war instead. Later that night, Daniel stood in the palace gardens, the cool night air brushing against his skin. The palace shimmered under the twin moons of Zarinth, casting soft silver light over the pathways. Footsteps approached. He turned to see Princess Velora stepping toward him. She had changed from her ceremonial robes into something more practical, a deep blue tunic with golden patterns woven into the fabric. Even now, she carried herself with grace, but her expression was thoughtful. "You suspect treachery," she said without preamble. Daniel nodded. "I do, and I think you do too." Velora hesitated, then sighed. There are factions within the Empire that fear change. They see humanity as a threat. If they can manipulate this negotiation into failure, they will have the excuse they need to push for war. Daniel crossed his arms. And do you agree with them? She looked at him sharply. If I did, you would not be standing here, Ambassador. A small smile touched his lips. Fair enough. She stepped closer. You are different from what I expected, she admitted. Most diplomats would have spoken in riddles, trying to please everyone. But you confront problems head-on. Daniel met her gaze. Because I don't have time for games, Princess. If we don't stop whoever is trying to sabotage this treaty, our people will be at war within months. Valora studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. I will help you. Daniel exhaled slightly. Then we start now. The palace corridors were quiet at night, but Daniel Cross knew that silence never meant safety. Shadows stretched along the crystalline walls, shifting as the twin moons of Zerinth cast their silver light through the arched windows. Beside him, Princess Valora walked with measured steps. Her royal presence made her seem untouchable, but Daniel had seen enough power struggles to know no one was truly untouchable. They will not move openly, Valora murmured, her voice just above a whisper. Whoever seeks to sabotage the negotiations will work from the shadows. Daniel nodded. Then we bring them into the light. Valora glanced at him. Easier said than done. Daniel smirked. I specialize in difficult things, Princess. She didn't return the smile, but there was a flicker of amusement in her violet eyes before they grew serious again. There is one person who might know where to start. She led him through a hidden corridor, the walls shimmering faintly as they passed. The palace was alive in its own way, built from bioengineered crystal that responded to touch, shifting colors like a living organism. At the end of the corridor, a door slid open without a sound. Inside, a small circular chamber held only a single figure, an old Zarinthian with deep green robes and silver markings on his forehead. Ambassador Cross, Valora said, meet Advisor Talvin. He has served the royal family for decades. If anyone knows the hidden currents of the court, it is him. Talvin studied Daniel with sharp, ancient eyes. A human seeking the truth in a Zarinthian palace, he murmured. The stars truly have a sense of humor. Daniel stepped forward. This negotiation is being sabotaged. I need to know who is behind it. Talvin tilted his head. And what makes you think I will help you? Daniel folded his arms. Because you know that war benefits no one, and if this treaty fails, war is exactly what will happen. Talvin was silent for a long moment. Then he let out a slow breath. There is a name, he said at last, but it is dangerous to speak it too loudly. Valora narrowed her eyes. Who? Talvin's gaze flickered toward the door, as if sensing unseen eyes. Then he leaned forward and whispered, Lord Syrinx. Daniel exhaled sharply. He had suspected Syrinx, but now he had confirmation. The noble had been the most vocal opponent of human negotiations, dismissing them as weak. Now, it made sense. He wanted the talks to fail. Valora's expression darkened. If he is involved, this is worse than I thought. Daniel nodded, which means we have to act fast. An unexpected attack. As Daniel and Valora left Talvin's chamber, the corridor felt different. The palace's living walls, which usually pulsed with soft light, now seemed dimmer. Daniel's instincts screamed a warning. We're being watched, he whispered. Valora tensed. I feel it too. A soft click echoed from the shadows. Daniel barely had time to react before a blast of energy shot toward them. He grabbed Valora and pulled her aside, the beam searing past where they had stood just moments ago. From the darkness, figures emerged, cloaked, masked, armed. Assassins. Valora's eyes flashed with anger. Syrinx's men. Daniel didn't hesitate. His training kicked in. He moved quickly, using the environment to his advantage. The palace's shifting walls provided cover, but their enemies knew the terrain well. One of the assassins lunged with a blade crafted from pure energy. Daniel barely dodged in time, countering with a strike to the attacker's ribs. The assassin staggered but did not fall. Velora, meanwhile, moved with the grace of a warrior. With a flick of her wrist, a hidden blade extended from her sleeve, and she disarmed an attacker with a swift motion. Daniel couldn't help but be impressed. So the princess could fight. But they were still outnumbered. More figures emerged, cutting off their escape. Daniel knew they couldn't hold out forever. They needed a way out. "Velora, any ideas?" he asked, ducking another attack. She scanned the corridor, then her eyes locked onto a glowing panel on the wall. There, without hesitation, she pressed her palm against it. The palace responded. The floor beneath them suddenly shifted, and before the assassins could react, the ground split open, dropping Daniel and Velora into a hidden passage below. The world blurred as they fell, the tunnel twisting around them. Then, with a heavy thud, they landed on a lower level of the palace. Silence followed. Daniel groaned, pushing himself up. I hope that was the plan. Velora stood, brushing dust from her tunic. More or less. He let out a small laugh. You could have warned me. Where's the fun in that? She replied, smirking. But the humor quickly faded. They had just survived an assassination attempt. That meant one thing. Syrinx was getting desperate. Daniel exhaled. We need to expose him. Fast. Velora nodded. Agreed. But first, we must make sure he doesn't strike again. As they began moving through the hidden passage, Daniel knew one thing for sure. This negotiation had turned into a battle, and he had no intention of losing. The hidden passage was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the palace's living walls. Daniel Cross moved carefully, his breathing steady despite the rush of adrenaline still pumping through his veins. An assassination attempt. That meant their enemies were no longer trying to manipulate events from the shadows. They wanted him, and Velora dead. Beside him, Princess Velora walked with controlled urgency. Her expression was unreadable, but Daniel could see the tension in her posture. This was no longer just a diplomatic mission. It was a fight for survival. We must reach the royal chamber, Velora said quietly. If Syrinx truly seeks to destroy these negotiations, then we must act before he makes his next move. Daniel nodded. Agreed. But we can't just walk in and accuse him. He'll deny everything unless we have proof. Velora's violet eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Then we find proof. As they moved deeper into the passage, the walls shifted slightly, responding to their presence. Daniel was still amazed by the biological technology the Zarinthians used, a palace that could adapt, listen, and even hide secrets. How far does this tunnel go? He asked. It connects to various parts of the palace. Velora explained. Only a few know of its existence. Daniel frowned. Then how did the assassins find us? She hesitated. Someone must have told them. Daniel's jaw tightened. That meant they had a traitor inside the palace. The secret meeting. After several minutes, they reached a small exit hidden behind a shimmering panel. Velora pressed her palm against it, and the doorway slid open silently. They stepped into a large chamber filled with tall, glowing pillars. The room was empty, or so they thought. Daniel froze. Voices. Velora gestured for silence, and they moved carefully toward the source of the sound. Through the gaps between the pillars, they saw a secret meeting taking place. Lord Syrinx stood in the center, speaking in hushed but firm tones. With him were several high-ranking nobles and a figure in a dark hood. Daniel and Velora exchanged a glance. This was it, the proof they needed. Syrinx's voice was sharp. The attack failed. The human and the princess are still alive. A noble beside him growled. Then we must strike again. They cannot be allowed to reach the council. The hooded figure finally spoke, his voice cold and mechanical. No, another attempt now would be reckless. The human is already suspicious. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Who was this? Syrinx clenched his fists. We are running out of time. The Emperor still favors peace, but if we expose humanity as a threat, if we make it look like they broke the treaty, war will be inevitable. Daniel's stomach twisted. They didn't just want the negotiations to fail. They wanted humanity to be blamed. Velora's expression darkened. Her own people were plotting against her. One of the nobles stepped forward. What of the princess? Syrinx smirked. She is young, idealistic. If she does not fall in line, she will be removed. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. He had suspected Syrinx was behind the sabotage, but hearing it confirmed was different. This was treason. Velora's jaw tightened, but her voice was calm. We need to leave. Now. Daniel nodded. And we need to act fast. A desperate escape. As they turned to leave, the palace suddenly shuddered. The walls pulsed with warning, sensing danger. Syrinx stopped talking. His eyes flickered toward their hiding spot. Someone is here, he growled. Daniel cursed under his breath. They had been discovered. Run, Velora whispered. They sprinted toward the exit just as a loud alarm rang through the halls. The palace itself was alerting the guards. Daniel didn't look back as heavy footsteps echoed behind them. He could hear Syrinx shouting orders. Do not let them escape. The hidden passage was too far. They needed a new way out. Velora grabbed Daniel's wrist. This way. She led him through a side corridor, past tall pillars and glowing walls. Daniel could hear guards closing in. Too many. They turned a sharp corner and nearly ran into a group of royal guards. For a split second, Daniel tensed, expecting an attack. But Velora stepped forward. Stand down, she commanded, her voice filled with authority. The guards hesitated. One of them, a tall warrior with silver markings on his face, spoke first. Your Highness, we were told you were missing. Daniel quickly realized these were loyalists. Not all the palace guards worked for Syrinx. Velora took a deep breath. Syrinx has betrayed the Empire. He is conspiring against the treaty. The guards exchanged looks. Then the leader nodded. We will protect you, Princess. Daniel exhaled. Finally, an advantage. But there was no time to celebrate. We need to reach the Emperor, Velora said, before Syrinx makes his move. Daniel nodded. Then let's go. We don't have much time. With the loyal guards at their side, they moved swiftly toward the heart of the palace. The battle for peace was about to begin. Daniel Cross moved quickly, his heart pounding as he and Princess Velora hurried through the palace corridors. The loyal guards surrounded them, their weapons drawn, ready for an attack. The walls of the palace pulsed with dim light, reacting to the chaos within. They had proof of Lord Syrinx's betrayal. They knew his plan, to sabotage the treaty and push Xerinth into war against humanity. But time was against them. The Emperor must hear the truth, Velora said firmly, before Syrinx poisons his mind with lies. Daniel nodded. Then we move fast. He won't give us another chance. They turned a corner, only to be met by a squad of palace guards blocking their path. Syrinx's forces. The leader, a tall warrior in black armor, stepped forward. His cold gaze locked onto Velora. By order of the High Council, Princess, you are to be taken into custody. Lay down your weapons. Daniel smirked. You first. The moment was tense. The air crackled with energy. Then, without warning, the battle began. The battle in the hallway. The first attacker lunged at Daniel, a glowing energy blade slicing through the air. He dodged, countering with a swift strike that sent the enemy stumbling back. Velora, moving with speed and precision, blocked an attack with her hidden blade and delivered a sharp kick to another guard. She fought with the grace of a warrior, each movement calculated and precise. The loyal guards clashed against Syrinx's forces, weapons flashing in the dimly lit corridor. The sounds of battle, metal striking metal, shouts of pain, and the hum of energy weapons filled the air. Daniel caught sight of the enemy commander charging toward Valora. "Princess, watch out," he shouted. Valora barely had time to react before the commander swung his energy blade at her. She dodged, but the weapon's edge sliced her shoulder, leaving a burning mark on her armor. Daniel's eyes flashed with anger. Without thinking, he grabbed a fallen weapon and blocked the commander's next strike. The force of the impact sent vibrations up his arms, but he held firm. With a quick movement, Daniel twisted the weapon out of the commander's grip and knocked him to the ground. Before the enemy could recover, Valora delivered the final blow, disabling him. More guards rushed in, but suddenly, a loud explosion rocked the palace. The floor trembled beneath them. "What was that?" Daniel demanded. Valora's expression darkened. "Syrinx is making his move." Syrinx's final plan. The battle had caused a delay, and now they had lost precious time. They had to reach the Emperor's chamber. Now, with the remaining loyal guards, Daniel and Valora sprinted through the palace, their minds racing. As they neared the chamber, the walls pulsed red, a security lockdown. "Too late," Valora whispered. "Syrinx has already reached the Emperor." Daniel's jaw clenched. No, they were not too late. He turned to the guards. "We need a way inside." Now, one of the loyalists, a young officer, stepped forward. "There's an emergency override panel in the next hall." "Then we use it," Daniel said. The group moved quickly, avoiding patrolling enemy forces. When they reached the panel, the officer worked fast, his fingers flying over the controls. A warning alarm sounded. "The system is resisting," the officer said. "They've sealed the chamber from the inside." Daniel's mind raced. They needed to force their way in. Valora stepped forward. The palace responds to the royal family's bloodline. She pressed her wounded hand against the control panel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the door shimmered and began to open. "Go," Daniel shouted. They rushed inside. The confrontation. Inside the Emperor's chamber, Lord Syrinx stood before the throne. The Emperor, an elderly Zarinthian with deep silver markings on his face, sat still, his expression unreadable. Surrounding him were Syrinx's elite warriors. The air was thick with tension. Syrinx turned slowly, his gaze locking onto Valora and Daniel. A slow smile spread across his face. "Ah, Princess," he said smoothly. "You should not be here." Valora stepped forward, her voice steady. "Your betrayal ends now, Syrinx." Syrinx's smile didn't fade. "Betrayal." He gestured toward the Emperor. "I only seek to protect our people. The humans are weak. They do not deserve our alliance." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "You attack your own princess. You tried to frame humanity for a war you started." Syrinx tilted his head. "And who will believe you?" He turned to the Emperor. "They are desperate, Your Majesty. They will say anything." The Emperor remained silent. His gaze flickered between Syrinx and Valora. Then he spoke. "I have heard enough." His voice was calm, but filled with power. The room fell into absolute silence. The Emperor slowly stood, his gaze piercing. "I have seen the truth. Syrinx, you have dishonored our people." Syrinx's confident expression finally faltered. "Your Majesty, I only." "Enough," the Emperor said. "Guards, arrest him." The elite warriors hesitated. Then, one by one, they lowered their weapons. Syrinx took a step back, his face pale. "No, this isn't over." But it was. Two royal guards seized him, locking his arms behind his back. Valora let out a breath of relief. "It is over, Syrinx." Daniel watched as the traitor was led away. The war had been prevented. The treaty had survived. The Emperor turned to Daniel. "Human, you have proven your people's worth today." Daniel bowed slightly. "I only did what was right." The Emperor nodded, then turned to Valora. "And you, my daughter, have shown true wisdom. I am proud." Valora's expression softened. Thank you, Father. The tension in the room eased. The danger was gone. Daniel looked at Valora and smirked. Well, that was intense. Valora chuckled softly. You call that intense? You haven't seen anything yet. They shared a look. The alliance between humans and Zarinthians had been saved, but their journey was far from over. The great royal chamber was silent, except for the faint hum of the palace's living walls. Lord Syrinx had been taken away, his plans of betrayal crushed. The war between Zarinthians and humans had been prevented, but even with the immediate danger gone, Daniel Cross knew this was not truly the end, only the beginning of something greater. Princess Valora stood beside him, her violet eyes fixed on her father, the Emperor of Zarinth. The Emperor, an elder with deep silver markings on his skin, studied Daniel carefully. You have shown courage, human. You risked your life for my daughter and for peace. That is not something I will forget. Daniel met the Emperor's gaze. I only did what was right. A slow nod. Perhaps that is why you succeeded. The aftermath. With Syrinx's forces disarmed and the palace secured, the news of his betrayal spread quickly. The High Council gathered, shocked by the revelation that one of their own had conspired against the Empire. The Council will decide Syrinx's fate, the Emperor announced, but his influence will no longer threaten our people. Valora exhaled softly, the tension in her shoulders finally easing. She turned to Daniel. It is over. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Is it? Valora hesitated, then smiled slightly. For now. The room was still filled with dignitaries and warriors, all watching as the Emperor approached Daniel once more. Ambassador Cross, he said, the peace between our peoples must not be fragile. You have proven yourself in ways I did not expect. His voice softened. Would you consider remaining as humanity's official diplomat to Zarinth? Daniel blinked. Stay. He had expected to return to Earth after the treaty was signed. But now, the Emperor was offering him a permanent position. He glanced at Valora. She said nothing, but there was a quiet hope in her expression. Daniel smiled. I would be honored. The Emperor nodded. Then let this day mark the beginning of a stronger alliance. The room erupted into applause. A private moment. Later that night, Daniel found himself standing on one of the palace's high balconies, looking out at the vast, glowing city of Zarinth. The sky shimmered with distant stars, and the twin moons bathed the city in silver light. He heard footsteps behind him. You accepted the offer. He turned to see Valora, her royal armor now replaced with a more relaxed, flowing outfit. She looked different, more at peace. Daniel chuckled. Did I have a choice? Valora tilted her head. Of course, you could have left. Daniel smirked. And miss all the excitement. She smiled. I am glad you're staying. Daniel looked back at the city. You think we can really make this work? A lasting peace. Valora stepped beside him. It won't be easy. Some will always resist change, but I believe in what we fought for. Daniel nodded. So do I. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars. Finally, Valora spoke again, her voice softer. You are, unlike any human I have met. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That's a good thing, right? She chuckled. Yes, it is. For a moment, Daniel considered how strange everything had become. A few days ago, he was just a diplomat negotiating a treaty. Now he was part of something much bigger. Then I guess we make history together, he said. Valora looked at him, her gaze warm. Yes, we do. A new era begins. The next day, the official treaty signing ceremony was held. In front of the High Council, the Emperor and representatives from both species, Daniel and Valora, signed the final agreement, binding Earth and Zarinth in peace. As the holographic seals activated, a new era was born. The threat of war was gone. But the true challenge, *** building trust between their worlds. *** was only beginning. and Daniel Cross was ready for it.